The crystal champagne flute shattered against the marble floor, silencing the elegant ballroom. All eyes turned to watch as Eliza Bennett, the new maid with a toddler hiding behind her skirts, stood frozen in humiliation. But no one expected what happened next. Billionaire host Alexander Harrington, whose cold reputation preceded him, slowly knelt before her frightened child, his designer suit touching the floor where moments ago his wealthy guests had been mocking them both. The room held its breath as he gently offered his hand to the wide-eyed little boy. If you're wondering how a single mother working as a maid could possibly change the heart of one of the world's most powerful men, and why this moment would transform everyone who witnessed it, stay with me until the end. This story might just change how you see the world too. If it touches your heart, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories that remind us what truly matters in life. My name is Eliza Bennett, and 6 months ago, I was desperate. After my husband died unexpectedly, leaving me with mounting medical bills and our 2-year-old son Oliver, I took the only job I could find, housekeeping at the Harrington Estate. The pay was good, the hours worked around Oliver's daycare, and the staff housing meant we wouldn't be homeless by the end of the month. What I didn't expect was to be thrust into the glittering world of Alexander Harrington, a man whose wealth was matched only by his apparent coldness. The Harrington Estate sprawled across 30 acres of manicured gardens and architectural perfection. On my first day, Mrs. Reynolds, the head housekeeper, gave me a tour that left me dizzy. "Mr. Harrington expects perfection," she warned, her eyes scanning my worn clothes. "He rarely speaks to the staff, and when he does, it's usually because something's wrong. Keep your head down, do your job well, and you'll be fine." I nodded, clutching my son's hand tighter. Oliver looked up at me with his father's eyes, trusting me completely to make this new life work. "What about my son?" I asked. The advertisement mentioned staff housing suitable for families. Mrs. Reynolds' expression softened slightly. "Yes, the cottage at the edge of the property. It's small but comfortable. Mr. Harrington doesn't come to that part of the grounds. As long as your child doesn't interfere with your work, there shouldn't be any problems." For the first month, I worked harder than I ever had. My hands grew calloused from cleaning, my back ached from bending and scrubbing, but the cottage was warm, Oliver was safe, and for the first time since James died, I could breathe without the crushing weight of financial ruin pressing down on my chest. I rarely saw Mr. Harrington. He was a shadow, a presence felt rather than seen. The staff spoke of him in hushed tones, his business genius, his ruthless negotiations, his solitary nature. Some said he hadn't smiled since his parents died in a plane crash 10 years ago, leaving him the empire at just 23. Others whispered about failed relationships and betrayals that had turned his heart to stone. Then came the night that changed everything. Mr. Harrington was hosting a charity gala, and with 3 staff members out sick, Mrs. Reynolds was short-handed. "Eliza, I need you to help serve tonight," she said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a request. "Your babysitter cancelled. Bring Oliver. He can stay in the staff room. The event will run late, and there's no time to find someone else." I dressed Oliver in his best clothes, a small button-up shirt and tiny khakis that James' mother had sent for his birthday. "You're going to be Mommy's special helper tonight," I told him, straightening his collar. "We have to be very quiet and very good." The ballroom was transformed into something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across walls draped in silk. Flowers worth more than my monthly salary adorned every table. The guests arrived in designer gowns and custom suits, dripping with jewelry and privilege. I moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, invisible to most. Occasionally, Oliver peeked out from the staff room where he was supposed to be coloring, his curious eyes taking in the spectacle. Each time, I gently guided him back, promising we'd be done soon. Then disaster struck. Oliver, tired of waiting, slipped past me and wandered into the ballroom just as I was serving champagne to a group of Mr. Harrington's business associates. A woman in a red dress pointed at him, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Well, what do we have here?" a little gatecrasher? I turned, my heart stopping as I saw Oliver standing there, thumb in his mouth, eyes wide at the crowd of strangers. In my haste to reach him, I bumped into someone, sending my tray of champagne flutes crashing to the floor. The sound was deafening in the sudden silence. "I believe this belongs to the help," sneered a man in a tuxedo, gesturing toward Oliver. Laughter rippled through the nearby guests. I felt my face burn with humiliation as I rushed to Oliver, pulling him against me protectively. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, kneeling to pick up the broken glass with trembling hands. "He's just tired, Anne. Leave it." The voice was deep, commanding. The crowd parted as Alexander Harrington himself approached. I'd only seen him from a distance before, tall, impeccably dressed, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to calculate everything in terms of profit and loss. Up close, I could see the faint lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. I stood, holding Oliver tightly. "Mr. Harrington, I apologize for the disruption. It won't happen again." He didn't look at me. Instead, his gaze was fixed on Oliver, who was staring back at him with unabashed curiosity. The room had gone completely silent. I could feel judgment radiating from the guests, could almost hear their thoughts, the maid who couldn't control her child, who didn't belong in their world. Then, to everyone's astonishment, Alexander Harrington knelt down until he was eye level with my son. His custom-tailored suit touched the floor where champagne and broken glass still lay. "Hello there," he said, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. "What's your name?" "Oliver," never shy, replied clearly, "I'm Oliver. I'm 2.5. He held up 3 fingers, and I quickly adjusted it to 2. A smile, an actual smile, touched Mr. Harrington's lips. "It's very nice to meet you, Oliver. I'm Alex." He offered his hand, and Oliver, after a moment's consideration, placed his tiny palm in the billionaire's much larger one. The guests watched in stunned silence. Alexander Harrington, who negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, who was rumored to have fired executives for being 5 minutes late to meetings, was kneeling on his ballroom floor, solemnly shaking hands with a toddler. "Are you having a party?" Oliver asked, looking around at the glittering crowd. "I am," Mr. Harrington replied. "Though I think it just got much more interesting." He glanced up at me, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "Mrs. Bennett," I supplied. "Eliza Bennett. I'm sorry about the disruption, sir. My childcare fell through," and Mrs. Reynolds said. He held up a hand, stopping my explanation. "No apology necessary." He stood, straightening his jacket. "Mrs. Bennett's son is my special guest tonight," he announced to the room at large, his tone daring anyone to object. "I believe we were discussing the Children's Hospital fundraiser. Perhaps this is a good reminder of why we're here." The woman in the red dress who had first pointed out Oliver looked chastened. The man who had sneered suddenly found his shoes fascinating. Mr. Harrington turned back to me. "Oliver can stay, Mrs. Bennett. Unless you'd prefer to take him home? I can arrange for someone to cover your shift." I was speechless. This was not the cold, distant employer I'd been warned about. "He should probably get to bed soon," I managed. Mr. Harrington nodded. "Of course. Jenkins will drive you to your cottage and bring you back when he's settled, if you wish to return." He looked down at Oliver again. "It was a pleasure meeting you, young man." Oliver beamed up at him. "Bye, Alex." As Jenkins, the chauffeur I'd only seen from a distance, led us toward the service exit, I glanced back. Alexander Harrington was watching us, his expression unreadable. The party had resumed around him, but he stood apart from it, as though suddenly aware of his isolation in the midst of so many people. That night marked the beginning of a change at the Harrington Estate. The next morning, a package arrived at our cottage, a set of wooden blocks and a stuffed bear for Oliver, with a note that simply read, "For my special guest. A.H." Over the following weeks, I began to see Mr. Harrington more frequently. He would appear in rooms I was cleaning, asking casual questions about my work, my background, my son. I learned he had studied literature before business, that he played the piano late at night when he couldn't sleep, that despite his wealth, he lived a surprisingly simple personal life. "Why housekeeping?" he asked one day as I dusted the library shelves. "Your vocabulary and the books I've seen you reading suggest you're educated." I hesitated, then decided on honesty. My husband was a teacher. I was finishing my master's in education when he got sick. Cancer. It moved quickly. I kept my eyes on my work, not wanting him to see the grief that still ambushed me at unexpected moments. The medical bills took everything, even with insurance. With a small child and no family nearby, I needed something stable with housing included. Teaching jobs are competitive, and I couldn't risk uncertainty. He was quiet for so long that I finally looked at him. He was watching me with an intensity that made me nervous. "I'm sorry about your husband," he said finally. "And I admire your resilience." Before I could respond, Oliver came running into the library, having escaped from Mrs. Reynolds who had been watching him while I finished my shift. "Mommy!" "Alex," he exclaimed, delighted to see us both. Mr. Harrington's face transformed as he crouched down to Oliver's level. "Hello, troublemaker. Escaping again?" Oliver giggled and launched into a story about the butterfly he'd seen in the garden. Mr. Harrington listened with complete attention, as though a toddler's rambling tale was as important as any business presentation. It was in these moments that I began to see the man behind the billionaire facade. There was a gentleness to him that he kept hidden from the world, a capacity for joy that seemed to emerge only in Oliver's presence. As spring turned to summer, Mr. Harrington, who had asked me to call him Alex when we were alone, began to include Oliver and me in his life in small ways. He invited us to have dinner with him occasionally, set up a small playground near our cottage, and even took time to read to Oliver when he visited the main house. The staff was bewildered by the change in their employer. Mrs. Reynolds pulled me aside one day, her expression concerned. "Be careful, Eliza," she warned. "I've worked here for 15 years, and I've never seen him like this. Rich men sometimes play at being ordinary, but they rarely change their nature." I assured her that there was nothing inappropriate happening, that Mr. Harrington was simply being kind to a child who reminded him of simpler times. But privately, I couldn't deny that something was shifting between us, a connection forming that went beyond employer and employee. Then came the second charity gala of the summer. This time, I wasn't serving, I was invited as a guest. The dress that arrived at my cottage was simple but elegant, in a deep blue that matched my eyes. The note with it read, "Oliver is also invited. No need to find a sitter. A.H." As we entered the ballroom, now familiar but no less intimidating, I felt the stares and whispers. The maid and her son, playing dress-up in the world of the wealthy. Oliver, oblivious to the social undercurrents, was excited about the party and the promise of ice cream. Many of the same guests from the previous gala were there, including the woman in the red dress, Mrs. Carmichael, now new, and her husband, who had sneered at Oliver. They watched with barely concealed disdain as Alexander greeted us warmly, introducing Oliver to some of his more open-minded associates. "Quite the Cinderella story," I overheard Mrs. Carmichael say to another woman. "Though I doubt it ends with a glass slipper. Men like Alexander play with pretty toys until they break or bore them." I pretended not to hear, focusing instead on making sure Oliver didn't spill punch on his new clothes. But the words stung because they echoed my own fears. What was I doing here? What did a man like Alexander Harrington really want from a widowed maid and her toddler son? The answer came later that evening, after Oliver had fallen asleep on a sofa in Alexander's study, where the staff had set up a makeshift bed for him. Alexander and I stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens, the sounds of the party a distant murmur behind us. "Thank you for inviting us," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Oliver had a wonderful time." Alexander smiled, his eyes on the moonlit landscape. He brings life to these events. To this house. He turned to face me. To me. My heart quickened at the intensity in his gaze. Alexander. When my parents died, he interrupted, I inherited not just their fortune but their isolation. Wealth creates walls, Eliza. Everyone wants something from you, or they assume you want something from them. Genuine connections become almost impossible. He moved closer, his voice low. Then you and Oliver crashed into my life, quite literally, with broken champagne flutes, and suddenly those walls didn't seem so necessary. I shook my head, trying to maintain perspective. We're from different worlds, Alexander. Your guests tonight made that very clear. My guests, he said with unexpected bitterness, are mostly people who benefit from associating with me. Few of them are friends. He took my hand, his touch sending warmth up my arm. You've never asked me for anything, Eliza. Not money, not favors, not even when you clearly needed help. And Oliver, he just sees me as Alex, not the Harrington fortune. I couldn't deny the truth of his words, or the feelings that had been growing inside me. But fear held me back, fear of being hurt again, of Oliver being hurt, of becoming a scandal or a charity case. I care about you, Alexander said simply. Both of you. More than I thought possible after years of keeping everyone at a distance. I don't know what that means yet, or where it might lead, but I'd like to find out. If you would. Before I could answer, a commotion from inside interrupted us. Oliver had woken and, finding himself alone, had become upset. We hurried back to find him crying, surrounded by concerned staff and curious guests who had heard the commotion. Alexander reached him first, gathering him up with a natural ease that surprised me. It's all right, buddy, he soothed. Your mom and I are right here. Oliver's sobs subsided as he recognized Alexander. Alex, he hiccuped. I woke up and you were gone. I'm sorry, Alexander said, with complete sincerity. I won't disappear again. The guests watched this exchange with varying expressions, surprise, curiosity, and in some cases, calculation. I could almost see them reassessing Alexander Harrington, the man they thought they knew. Mrs. Carmichael approached, her smile not reaching her eyes. How touching, she said. Alexander, I never knew you had such a paternal instinct. Alexander's expression cooled as he looked at her. There's a lot you don't know about me, Victoria. Perhaps because you've never bothered to look beyond my bank account. Her smile faltered. Alexander turned to me, still holding Oliver who was now drowsily resting his head on the billionaire's shoulder. I think it's time we got this young man properly to bed. Would you mind if I walked you both home? And so, in full view of the society elite of the city, Alexander Harrington left his own gala early to walk his maid and her son back to their cottage. The gossip would be explosive by morning, but as we strolled through the moonlit gardens, Oliver now sleeping peacefully in Alexander's arms, I couldn't bring myself to care. At the cottage door, Alexander carefully transferred Oliver to me. Think about what I said, he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from my face. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Alexander began to include us more openly in his life. He took us to the zoo, to children's museums, to parks where Oliver could play with other children. He see me.